I'm Carolyn Ward-Bamford, Curator of the Musical Instruments collections here at the Library of Congress. I welcome you all to our annual Stradivari anniversary concert. This evening features the Isidore String Quartet with Misha Amory and Nina Lee. This evening, I am joined by Kenneth Slowik, far end, as well as Nina and Misha. Ken is Curator of Musical Instruments at the National Museum of American History, and he's also a cellist, a viola da gambist, a keyboard player, a conductor, a director of the Smithsonian Chamber Music Society. Ken and I collaborate annually in this room, actually every January, on a Haydn workshop that he established in his mentoring programs. And tonight, we're going to collaborate on something very, very special. We will bring together 5 Stradivari instruments from the library's collection, which you usually see here, and along with the Smithsonian's world-renowned Stradivari cello from 1701 called the Cervé, and that will happen in the sextet by Brahms, the Opus 18. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, American History. Playing the Cervé this evening is Nina Lee. She studied at Curtis and at the Juilliard School with Joel Krasnick. As many of you may know, was in the Juilliard String Quartet, and the Juilliard played here for decades. She teaches at Juilliard and plays with the Brentano String Quartet, among many other things, as you can well imagine. We're also joined by Misha Amory. He's the founding member of the Brentano Quartet. He studied at Juilliard with Sammy Rhodes, who was also in the Juilliard String Quartet, as many of you might have heard. And he teaches at Juilliard and Curtis. He will play the Fulton, Ex-Baird, Tuscan Medici, Stradivari viola of 1690, a gift this year to the music division from the David and Amy Fulton Foundation, and an in-kind donation from the Baird family. Thank all of them for that. Nina and Misha will join the Isidore, as I mentioned, in the second half of the program to play the Brahms sextet for 2 violins, 2 violas, and 2 cellos. Now, as the library has 2 violins and now has 2 violas, but only 1 cello, what did we think about doing? We are fortunate that we were able to borrow the Strad cello from the Smithsonian collection. And again, thank you, Ken, and all his colleagues at American History for helping make that amazing loan happen, as you will hear tonight. Okay, I want to tell you briefly about our viola, and then I'll have Ken tell you about his cello.
My cello, you hear she said.
Oh, yes, that's true. Okay, my viola was commissioned from Stradivari in 1690 by a friend, a patron of the arts in Florence, for the Medici family. And it stayed in Italy, really, in Florence, until about 1924, when it went to England. And then eventually it was sold to Herbert Strauss, whose family had the Macy's department store here. He was in America. And eventually in 1957, Cameron Baird, who was a philanthropist and a violist, a huge champion of music in Buffalo, and founding the chair of the department at the music school there, he bought it in 1957, and but then he died in 1960, just a few years later. So eventually, Jane, his wife, put the viola here on loan in 1977, and it had been on loan here for many years. At the time that he purchased it, the Hills in London wrote that it was one of the finest of the 10 existing examples of the maker, its preservation being as remarkable as its beauty. One other thing, if you do go to Cremona, I have not been yet, but the paper templates and the walnut mold for The viola were later used for our 1727 Cassavetti viola, which is really interesting to think about. So Ken, tell me about your cello.
So you mind if I get a little nerdy about cello, first of all?
No, he will. I said he's a cellist. And
So we call this thing the cello, but the real name, as you know, is violoncello, which is often misspelled as violoncello, which etymologically makes no sense because in Italy, of course, you had the violino, we all know what that is, and then just like you have tortellini and tortellone, you had the violone, which was the big violin family instrument. And in the 17th century, all of the instruments, the first half of the 17th century anyway, were strung with pure gut made from the sheep intestine. It's a very elastic material. It doesn't have a lot of mass, so in order to get an instrument that would be able to produce the low frequencies that we associate these days with the cello, the instruments had to be quite big, probably on the about 1.5 to 2 inches longer than our modern cello. So in the beginning of the second part of the 17th century, there was a remarkable change in string-making technology that happened in England and in France and in Italy all about the same time. And in France, it caused the six-string viol to have a low seventh string added. At least that's what the stories tell us, that Monsieur Saint-Colombe did this. In Italy, it made the makers and the players who were tired of reaching as big as they had to, as long as they had to make these low strings, rejoice in the fact that with the extra mass of metal wire wound on the gut core, the instruments could be made shorter. And so the diminutive cello was tacked onto violone, and then the E elided, so violoncello became the thing. So if you see misprint violoncello, it means a very, very tiny violin, actually. So Stradivari we know there are about 70 instruments that we call cellos today that survive from Stradivari's hand, and 29 of them date from before or up to 1701, which is the year of this cello, I've called that for convenience, that I brought over. Of those 29, there are only 3 that have survived to the present date without being cut down to make them easier to play and more to correspond with the full-size cello, as we call it, that Stradivari sort of invented around 1707. So between 1701 and 1707, he really wasn't making these bigger instruments. Instead, he was looking around to see what other makers were doing to make violoncelli. And it's very interesting because we see in archival records of payments to musicians, Giovanni dal Violone, Giovanni del Violone, Giovanni del Violone, and suddenly, around 1690 or so, he becomes Giovanni dal Violoncello. So he got a new instrument, right? There are a number of these smaller instruments that survive. So the fact that not only is the Cervé, but also the Library of Congress's Castelbarco among these 3 that have not been cut down. And by the way, I think your program says the Lord Aylesford wasn't cut down, but it was cut down sometime after 1966. Cut down a little bit, but cut down nonetheless. They cut down in length, but also in width. And a very famous example is in the collection in the National Music Museum in Vermilion, South Dakota, an instrument by Andrea Amati that was made as part of a set for Charles IX of France. These instruments were all painted on the ribs around the outline of the instrument with his motto, Pietate Justitia, justice and through justice and piety, and also had on the back some paintings. And the cello has on the back, right in the middle, a picture of Justice, female Justice, holding a scales in one hand and a sword in the other. That's fine. Till you look a little carefully and you realize that she's missing about here to here because that instrument had the middle seam taken apart and a couple of 3/4 inches or so cut off of on either side and then stuck back together. So, you know, a lot of these instruments that are still great instruments, and they've been played by great players. But it's, as an instrument person, to see the library's cello in so freshness, or to see this is really quite special. I would say just one more thing, which is that violins and most of violas are almost always made with a maple back. And the majority of cellos are that way too, but about 6 of these pre-1700 celli from Stradivari are made with different kind of wood, willow or maple on the back. And what's quite interesting about these 2 instruments that we have tonight is that the Castelbarco is made with a willow or poplar back. It's very hard to tell the difference between the 2. And our Cervé instrument is made with a maple back. It's called the Cervé because the Belgian cellist of that name owned it in the mid-19th century. And I have to say 2 things. Not only has it survived uncut, which is quite remarkable, but also it survives something else. Cervé got this cello as a gift or a bribe. I don't have time to tell you that story, but one or the other, from a Russian family on his first trip to Russia. And he went back a number of times because he also acquired a Russian wife. He said on one of these trips, he was going from one town to another in the middle of a snowstorm, which blew up, and he had the cello in a case strapped to the back of his sledge. And the snow was so furious that he didn't notice until he got to the destination that the cello wasn't there. So he said he had a very short and sleepless night, and the next morning when the storm had subsided, he set out with a Cossack horseman on his horizon to the right and another one on that man's horizon to the left. They swept over the tundra, and finally they saw something in the distance, and on getting closer they discovered that it was a pack of wolves that was gnawing the leather binding of the case. So it's remarkable not only that it's here, but it survived.
When did you acquire the cello?
We got it as a gift in 1980.
Wonderful. Okay, now let's talk about the program and the players. And I guess what I kind of find fascinating about tonight, and maybe both of you can speak to this, your students are here. You've learned from the Juilliard. Your students have learned. There's just this confluence of things going on in this program tonight that really strikes me, and I don't know where to start or end with it, but the program goes from Bach to Beethoven to Brahms, and Brahms is looking back at Bach and Beethoven, and then the violist in the program, Devin, has arranged some of those composers in the first piece. So he's looking back. He's a young student, a young player, but they're remarkable, the Isidore. They studied at Juilliard, and their teachers were in the Juilliard Quartet, who've come here and played these pieces on these instruments. And I find that really wonderful that we're all here tonight now, and this has happened here. And I wonder what your thoughts are on being here and playing these instruments with this young quartet that you know, and that they wanted you to be here with them.
Well, I'll certainly start by saying that I never come to Library of Congress without thinking of my teachers and chamber coaches, which were the Juilliard Quartet. As Lynn has mentioned, the Juilliard Quartet played here many, many times over several decades. And would it be fair to go even further and say that they perhaps are more associated with the concert series than any other great 20th and 21st century quartet, that they came here so often?
To our generation, I think so, yes.
Yeah.
They were here for many decades.
They did Beethoven cycles several times here, and when I was a student of Sam Rhodes, as was Devin Moore, the violist in the Isidore Quartet. We both studied with him, and when I was a student, he said, I was starting to play more and I was starting to have some success, and he said, I want you to go down to Library of Congress, and I've talked to the curators there, and I've arranged for you to go and play for a day on the Baird Strad. I said, Baird Strad, what's that? He said, it's the Baird Strad, it's the Baird Strad. He explained to me that it was owned by this eminent Buffalo family, and it was housed here under lock and key in the strictest of supervision, and if I wanted to try it out, I would have to go inside the building and play it under carefully guarded circumstances. And so I did. I took the train down here and I played it, and I was entranced by it, but I was also partly, I feel, looking back, that I was too young to quite be able to just meet it for a day and take advantage of kind of what it was about. I understood that I had something special in my hands. I also understood maybe I would need 6 weeks to play it to really start to figure out like how it works and how it responds. I played a modern instrument at that point, which was fine, but it didn't have the complexity or the specialness by half that this instrument had. But all the years after that, I always thought of this Stradivari viola as the kind of extraordinary example of what a viola by that maker can be. I think it was mentioned that there are about 70 Strad cellos that are in existence, and give or take, and there are Stradivari violins are wonderful, but there are hundreds of them. He mostly made violins, and there are hundreds of these priceless examples all over the world. Violas, there's 10 or 11 in the world, and several of them live in closets. For insurance reasons and other reasons, they don't get played and they can't be taken out, and the owners guard them jealously. And when that happens, instruments go to sleep. Their sound becomes buried under 6 or 7 acoustical blankets, and you take it out and you play it after it hasn't been played for a few years, and it sounds dormant. It sounds like you can see a spark of light like underneath all those blankets, but you can't really access it. And we've occasionally encountered these. The Royal Palace in Spain has a matched quartet of Stradivari instruments, which is beautiful and which has almost never left that building. And it's extraordinary to see it because the instruments look like brand new Sears Roebuck stringed instruments that you can order from a catalog. They're orange, and they haven't been weathered. They haven't been exposed to the elements over all these basically 300 or more years now. I believe they exited the palace once when Napoleon looted the palace. And then after the wars were over, they got returned. And they've been there ever since. But those instruments are played maybe 3 or 4 years, and 3 or 4 times a year, maybe, if that, and they don't sound great. They do sound great, but they don't sound great.
It's like trying to revive a relationship with your most hormonal friend. They know that they haven't been cared or touched or, befriended in a while, and so they kind of close off until you get back in their good graces, and then they kind of open up. They're really like, I think, people, like friends or spouses.
Misha says something very interesting, though, about the relative paucity of number of violas, that we tend to think, oh, a Stradivari quartet, that's wonderful. But actually, Stradivari died before the first real string quartet was written. So that's the reason. If you think about what was the prevailing musical form that involved violins, aside from concertos you might think of, would be the trio sonata with 2 violins and a bowed bass. And so we have 400 or so violins and 70 cellos and 4 violas right in the middle.
Yes. Yeah. We had to wait for our day to come. We had to be more patient. But I will say, I mean, that for me, having studied with Sam Rhodes, who was so in awe of this institution and so loved to play the instruments and to play in this hall, it's great to join Devin, who he studied with me for a hot minute. I mean, he studied with me for about a year in collaboration with Sam Rhodes, but really we both think of ourselves as students of Sam. And so to us, we're very conscious of a sort of a family or a genealogy of performers, and of which I'm sure there are many others. But and Josh, the cellist, studied with Joel. Is that true? Or
yeah, I mean, I would say, part of what is really attractive of having a life like this, other than the fact that we spend all day trying to create something beautiful through the art of conversation, is that this kind of rich tradition of apprenticeship I remember when I was a student, I looked up to my teacher when he would invite me in and invite me in to play with him or other people in the Juilliard Quartet or other quartets. I was just like bursting. And the fact that Josh is also a student of Joel's, and Joel was personally, like, every aspect of what you would think, even like in the most romantic sense, a mentor that, like, we weren't romantic, but basically he guided me. He gave me the confidence to really be myself, to trust my instinct. And the fact that, I'll say one of the we lost Joel. Joel passed away last spring, and it was really difficult for me, just because I feel like, once you're a student of Joel Krosnick, we're all kind of cut from the same cloth. Like, I don't even need to really spend too much time with you. We're all in the same boat. And one of the last conversations I had with him was about this concert. And I said, because of the size of the survey, and I don't have the largest hand, I think a lot of the talk initially was the size, whether I'd be able to play it in tune or get my hand around, or whether it would hurt, like injure my hand, that kind of thing. A lot of people were talking about it. And so when the offer came to play, I was just talking to Joel. I was like, I'm a little apprehensive about that, the size. I don't want to be a weak link if I don't know how to play this instrument. Maybe I should play mine. And then he went, you must try. and then he says, but when you do try, when you shift, shoot for a good whole tone higher than what you would normally think. And I was just like, oh my goodness. But he was so excited for me. I mean, this is the heart of my teacher, is the fact that when things happen for me and he saw, oh, I used to do that. Let me tell you what I learned from that. And this is what you need to do. And you need to think about this. And don't get too hung up on this. And like, it's like he was playing it again in his memory. And I know he's here with me tonight, and I know he's just smiling at the fact that Josh and I are playing together, and when Misha's like, yeah, I'm playing on the other Strad. I was like, okay, I'll give it a chance. I don't know if I'm just gonna be good or not, but I'm just gonna say this survey Strad, I've had, like Misha said, we've been able to play many Strad's instruments through the years, or I have. It's magnificent. It's one of the best instruments. I've been honored to try many things, and it's, when you play it, it's like saying, oh, there's something in there. Let me see, what do I need to do to bring out these sounds, or testing my imagination. It's imagination, it's intuition, it's courage, and it's, thank goodness, it's Ken in the middle, because I can't be left alone with the instrument. It's Ken in the hall going, move your bow closer to the bridge, and giving me pointers. And it's been we've only been here for a couple of days, but I've learned so much just about my own playing and my own self, about how to make sounds and how to trust certain things. It's a very solitary existence, this kind of being a musician. There's so many hours of being on your own and criticizing yourself. It's kind of masochistic. But then to have a set of like challenges in this way, to like really say, okay, I know it's in there. I gotta figure out how to bring it out. And then to say, my instinct brings me here, let's just go with that. It's been truly rewarding, and then also to play with the Isidores has been just incredible. They're, I guess we're the old ones. Are we the old ones?
Correct.
Yeah, they're like in their 20s.
Not an emotional age, but
No, but
physically.
I just kind of remember being still called the young and up and coming, but we're not. anymore, I guess. They could, yes, I could have birthed them and not as a teenage mother. I realize this. And so it's just lovely seeing this young band of men just at the beginning of what I know is going to be an extremely fruitful career, and to just join them on their ride for just this little bit with all these instruments. We're all like kids in a candy store without, yeah.
You know what I like, coming back to this confluence that I keep feeling and hearing from you and them and the instruments and the stories that are held in the instruments and the music that comes out with all of you. The quartet, and this isn't the program here, said they were heavily influenced by the Juilliard string quartet. And the idea of, and here's a quote, approaching the established as if it were brand new, and the new as if it were firmly established. I just love that, right? This fresh, old new thing. I think you're gonna hear this tonight and feel this a lot. Do you want to add to this at all with your students? I don't know. No, we don't. Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. It's 7:15. Oh, we need to go. Okay, sorry. We did start a little late. How about one quick question? If you have a quick question, raise your hand. Okay. Oh, good.
Hello. You mentioned how you found your time with these instruments very special and very valuable, and you've learned a lot from the instruments. What are you going to do when you leave here and you go back to your other instruments? And what are you going to take away and bring to your playing?
Oh, it's interesting. I remember being a student and having, an okay instrument, and my teacher was just not persuading me or inspiring me to pull the sound out of the viola that she wanted. And eventually she handed me her much better viola and much larger viola and said, just play this and fool around with it and try to do what I was just asking you to do. And I tried it, and I had sort of some success, sort of indifferent success. And I was sort of playing it, but it wasn't really mine, and it felt too big, and I thought I was doing what you want. And then I went back to my instrument, and she said, now I'm hearing more of that. You're taking what you learned, maybe unconsciously on my instrument, and taking it back to your playing of your instrument, like your fingers or your arms or your breathing have some kind of extra knowledge. And I suppose when I play on a really extraordinary instrument like this, I at least like to think that maybe I'll come back to my own instrument. I'm lucky to play on a wonderful instrument at home now as well, but it's very, very different from this one. And it's been a sort of a conceptual stretch for me to go from that instrument, which actually is much larger now than this Stradivari is, and learn how to play this and what I don't have to force with this. And I'm kind of intrigued to find out, tomorrow, the day after, when I go back, will I be different? Will I appreciate my own instrument in new ways? Will I realize that I was going about it slightly the wrong way because of what I've learned here? So not really verbalizable, my answer to your question, but I do have a sense that something will have changed in my own thinking or way of feeling physically the instrument.
Yeah, just to add to that, one would probably assume that I would be somewhat depressed when I have to give the cello back tonight to Ken. And maybe there'll be a little bit of sadness because it's been a real thrill. But I do think that the sounds and the way that you play on, for instance, on the Survey Strad, I've never played a concert on pure gut strings. So the top two strings are pure gut, and the bottom two strings are wound gut. And I play on all synthetic strings on my cello, which is much, much thinner. So the action, my fingers have been they've been hurting a little bit, sore because the strings are quite a bit wider. But I have to say, after a while, all the training or whatever, instinct and imagination start kicking in, and your body starts doing things, moving the bow in a different way, doing different pressure, all these different types of things. And what comes out is kind of oh my gosh, that's pretty cool. And so when I go home and I go back to my instrument, what I'll do is I'll say, I was given this extraordinary opportunity to make these sounds, and imagine that my sound world has completely been stretched and is larger now, and I'm going to take that and not forget it and try and go for those same sounds on my instrument. And it's, you know, it's a total, I was saying to somebody the other day, in essence, if you're able to make a life doing what we do, we've been left to be children. You know, we play on toys, and I have a play date with another person and their toy for many hours, and like we spend that time trying to plumb the truths of Beethoven or Brahms or any of music that we're doing, and that kind of idea of play and what we can do for each other and what we can do for ourselves, having this opportunity completely is another way of staying completely connected. I mean, you know, after doing this for let's say 3 decades, one would think if you're in a job doing something for 30 years, you grow a bit tired of it. Not me. And especially not being, when you get to do things like this, it keeps you young. It keeps you wanting to continue making, because you have you have new toys.
Thanks for the question. All right, everyone, enjoy the concert tonight. I know you will.